this. Everyone, welcome to Modern JavaScript for Drupal developers. These slides were required. There's my employer. Thank you for sending me here. There's some more people that made this thing possible, and some even more people. All right. So, Modern JavaScript for Drupal developers. This is me freezing in Iceland wearing 2 giant jackets. I do JavaScript at Acquia, which may seem unusual. I primarily work on Drupal core, not in contrib. I don't understand what goes on there. You may have seen me in your issues for core acting as a human ESLint parser. Please run those tools. That's why they're there. I am one of the Drupal 8 JavaScript subsystem maintainers and one of the people working on the JavaScript modernization initiative. Sally's down here too. Please say nice things. React Admin UI, this is the other big thing that takes up a lot of my time. This is a modern take on Drupal's administrative interface. You can find me always working on Twitter or Drupal. You know, I had this job and I needed to make a Drupal.org username, and I took the funniest misspelling of Drupal as my username. So there we go. All right, things. We're going to talk about a lot of JavaScript things today, this afternoon, sometime. And if you find that you want me to talk about something else that's not in this list, just please let me know. I will gladly try and explain something off the top of my head. So we're going to talk about arrow functions, default parameters, template strings, destructuring assignment, enhanced object literals, promises, and classes. So this is like a whirlwind tour of all the stuff that Drupal only just started using. So if there's anything else, like, just shout it out, and I will try and cover it. So JavaScript, it's old, like 22 years old, and Drupal is 17, so there's like some, you know, they could be like brothers or something. You know, Drupal has gotten a lot better recently. Drupal 8's like super snazzy, and so it's JavaScript. If you're only familiar with doing JavaScript in, like, you know, 5 years ago, you know, you might think like, wow, what a dumb language. Who would use that? Not anymore. So we'll just like do this very brief history lesson. There's Pokemon in here. If you like Pokemon, be prepared or not. So yeah, it's past. March 1996, JavaScript. Yay! This is just like the introduction. Then to 1997, what is like commonly 1997. The ECMAScript 1 spec. This was like the very first release of what we know is like common JavaScript. Then ES2 in 98 and ES3 in 99. So, Sky, sad Pikachu. ES4 was like abandoned. They never made an ES4 spec. It just went away. There was like political differences and like language complexity issues. We would have gotten really great things that we have now, like classes and modules and type annotations and generators and destructuring and all these really great things that we have now. They could have happened a long time ago if people had stopped fighting. So then 10 years later, after ES3, we get ES5, and this is what this is the spec that everyone is familiar with today. If you write JavaScript for most of Drupal, you will see that it is very closely aligned with what is available in the ES5 spec. This was December of 2009. We're trying to modernize this. So the present, right? This is like what I wish I was doing right now. It's too hot. ES6. So even though it's called ES6, this was released in June of 2015, so like, I don't know, ES 2015 maybe. And we got things like classes and modules and iterators and for of loops and arrow functions and better ways to handle binary data and promises and math and all kinds of really sweet things, right? If you remember ES4, like a lot of these things could have happened 10 years ago. ES7, this is sort of, if you're like following along with JavaScript, this is pretty much what we're doing nowadays. Neat things like exponent operator, futures, ES8. So like numbers and math enhancements are coming. Like async await is here now, not coming. So really great things. Class and instance properties, which I'll like touch on super briefly at the end. Great. So ES6 tour thing, look at this Pikachu guy. He's like whipping off his outfit. Arrow functions. Who uses like arrow functions all the time right now? So not many people have raised their hand. Okay, so they probably make you feel like this when you see them. This is how I felt when I first looked at the arrow function after like 10 years of writing the word function. Hilariously, the primary design goal for arrow functions was a shorter syntax. People didn't want to have to type function and then some parenthesis and curly braces to get anything out. So not like some side benefits happened, but shorter syntax, it's great. Type less characters, be happy. So like, it's a great example here. You know, you used to have to write function name and then some curly braces and then a return. And now this all fits on one convenient line with an arrow function. And these two are, for the purposes of this demonstration, functionally equivalent. So some things to take into consideration using arrow functions. No automatic binding of arguments. If you've ever called a function and just like passed a bunch of things in and then you go into that function and you use these arguments, those don't exist anymore. Arguments is not a thing with arrow functions. There are ways to handle that. I'll explain them. And you don't get a new this variable. And this is the biggest takeaway from arrow functions that tend to confuse people. When you create an arrow function, this represents the nearest like enclosing scope. So yeah, don't create their own this context. This trips people up constantly, and it's something to take into consideration that just typing this in your function probably will not do what you think it does. You can get around, people got around that by let that equal this. This is like all over Drupal's code, all over the place. Yes, Dean?
Why is it like this? Why does it no longer bind this to the function?
Why? Because it doesn't create a new scope. Yes, thank you. Yeah, so that's a good question. Daniel asked why it doesn't create a new this, and is that arrow functions don't create a new scope when you like call this function. Yep, original meaning. I like really need to look at the next slide. I just said all this, the enclosing context. So check out this code right here. What will happen if this runs? Anybody? That's cool. This.age is not a thing inside this setInterval function because we've created a new scope. So you can do this with the arrow function, and now this.age totally works, and everyone is happy. It's a little bit easier to know what you're going to get when you use an arrow function. So I said arguments, right? Use the spread syntax. Args, just to take all of the things you've passed to this function and turn them into a variable. I'm not going to talk about spread syntax unless people really want me to, but you can get around this, and we have started doing this in Drupal core in quite a few places. Arrow functions can't be used as constructors, so all the places that you call new on things, like new instances of Ajax link view or whatever that thing is called, you can't, that cannot be an arrow function. You have to use the function keyword for that. No prototype property. So if you're used to creating a function and then adding methods to the prototype, if your initial constructor is an arrow function, then this will not work. Any questions? No? Okay. So, default parameters. This is another sort of function-specific thing. They allow you to initialize your functions, function keyword, or arrow functions with default values. Let me just skip to this. So, normally in function, this is an arrow function, for example. If you didn't know that b was going to be something that you were going to pass in, it's b equals b or 2, right? And this is again, all over the place, everywhere. We don't know what JavaScript will ever provide, or Drupal will ever provide to any JavaScript function. So we can just, in sort of the round braces that represent sort of where the properties are of the function, c equals 2. And these two are the same thing, right? Except in this case it's b, in this case it's c, but you get the point. Oh, man. Okay, so skipping back, null and undefined. So when an argument is omitted, right, or you pass undefined, right, you're going to get these default parameters. But one thing to take into consideration, you can pass null, right, and that's a valid value here. So you're not going to trigger the default state if you pass null. So default parameters can be anything you want. They can be numbers, crazy stuff. You can even call a function as a default value. Just please don't do that. These are evaluated at call time, so you can do cool things like make some default parameters available to default parameters further down the line. Like this, where we just make up another property passed to this function called C, which we just concat A and B defaults together, and you get a value at the end. This is useful. I don't know where, but you can definitely do things like this here. Any questions about this default properties, parameters? No? Okay. This room is huge. So template literals and multiline strings. This is kind of a big deal for Drupal because a lot of the stuff we do is take a value from PHP, put it together with a string, and then return it. We do crazy things like this, put all the values in an array and join them with a string that has no width. Or use a bunch of plus signs and put a bunch of strings together, and then things get where does this value actually exist, and how do you know that you got your quotes all in the right place? And it's lots of problems can get there. So template strings use a backtick. This is important to notice because you can't make a template string unless you're using the backtick. So it doesn't work with single quotes or double quotes or any of that. Just looks like this, right? It's just a regular text string, and then the expression you want to replace is just $, and then curly braces. It's pretty simple. You can put anything in this expression. It can be a function, some number, anything. It's pretty nice. Template strings also allow you to make things like multi-line strings, where the backticks are just on different lines, and then you can, just go wild, construct an entire HTML document in a multi-line string and send that back to me. You can still do all kinds of expression replacements. Yeah.
How many spaces is there between strings and just looks like this when it's being rendered?
Okay, this is a good question. You can, so think it's like a tab or a new line character. We have this problem, but there is a way to, so when this gets rendered, right, there's going to, like, this space between the end of the editor and then the string will render an actual space. So if your markup or whatever you're doing is white space dependent, multi-line strings might not work for you. You can add like a special character. I can look it up if we want to tell you to not render anything except a single space at the end of the line. So.
Is there a new line in the first line before the A?
Yes, there is a new line too. Yeah. You get like a multiple like space blocks, like a NBSP or something like that width of character. Any questions? Yeah. Yeah, yeah. So they asked if this is acting like a HereDoc in PHP, which, I don't know, somebody who really knows PHP can tell me exactly what that means, but it's multi-line string thing. Okay, destructuring. Who is familiar with destructuring at all? Yeah, okay. So destructuring is a really like convenient pattern for extracting values from data in JavaScript. We've had lots of ways to assign like multiple values to an object in a single expression in the past, but never a way to get multiple pieces of data out. And primarily we'll be looking at like destructuring for objects and arrays. So we got this object trees, it's my boss. And we want to create two variables, first and last, representing pieces of the name. Curly braces, first, comma, last. So we're going to instantiate like two new variables here, and we're going to pick those pieces off of the object. And as long as like this matches and this matches, first and first matches, we'll just go pick that key off the object, and it will be assigned this variable. You can do like fancy things like rename the variable you create when you're doing the destructuring, but I don't want to, that's kind of outside the scope of this. So destructuring works for all iterable values. It's like primarily arrays. So like this, we can make X and Y represent the first two values of this array. You can do neat things where if you want to like skip over them, just put a bunch of commas and don't assign a name to the piece you don't want in the array and just get the last one and the first one. Maybe don't do that, but you can. JavaScript is still very like loose on the things that you can do that are valid but look messy. So just be aware. Destructuring works really, really great for return values. If you have a function or something that returns like a big an object or an array, and you just want like a couple of pieces out of that, you can use destructuring to create like variables that you can use later on without having to go through this like weird process or always reference this like blob object. Please don't complain about my regex skills. It's like great, but there's a date, and we're going to get like this exec returns 4 pieces, all day, month, and year, and we just created like 4 new variables from executing this regex on a string. So, and then you can just use those pieces later on if you want. So, any questions? Yes. Yes. Yeah, with nested, so the question was, with nested objects, does destructuring work? And all you have to do is just, you can infinitely destructure the object. Like further down, it's just like, get your key, colon, new set of curly braces, and then keep like walking all the way down the tree as far as you want. Yeah, there's no, like, I don't think there's a limit, but obviously just be careful because If some nested object is not there, it'll throw the error and not found.
Okay.
Yeah. There is a proposal to add an operator for fetching, like doing destructuring on objects, like deeply nested ones, that will like provide a default, essentially. So, but it's not. It's in some, like, I don't know, weird stage 0 set thing. Any other questions? Okay. So, enhanced object literals. This is just like object fun. So you can use shorthand syntax now, so type less. Everyone loves that. You can do computed property keys. Before this was hard, and now it's easy. So before, like if we wanted to make this object, and we had some variables, and we wanted to put them in this object, it looked like this, and this is like lots of duplicate code and lots of writing and colons and stuff that nobody wants. Also, if you wanted to make like a computed key, it's like make your object and then like use square braces and then make a template string and put your variables together. See template strings, everybody. This is like ridiculous. Who does this? Is awful. So in the future, we're creating a new object. A is in fact the key and the value here. B, same way. C is a function. And we've created like this really great, like, you know, a computed key right here. It's just square braces and then do whatever sort of operation you want to get a new key name. It works quite well. So any questions about this? Is like short, but I don't want to. Talk about promises next, which is fun. So, questions? Yeah. Was that a question? What? No, what?
No, I'm okay.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So, who has experience using promises? Okay, so like more people, and what? Like, can you just like shout out where you've used promises before? Just like any examples.
In code you wrote for me.
Okay, that's definitely not clear or vague at all.
On the server.
Okay, we're not talking about the server.
Ajax.
Ajax. Drupal Ajax? Yeah. Okay, anybody else? Okay. Okay, cool. I don't know anything about Angular. Maybe they use promises. So, promises are great. They allow you to write code to handle future results that may or may not happen. You may or may not be aware, sort of JavaScript is just this like single thread, and everything just like goes onto the thread and does the thing and gets off when it's done. And you might have this like long-running action, like go fetch a really large payload via Ajax, and if you're not handling this, like if you're handling it synchronously, your entire browser will be blocked and you won't be able to do anything. No other interactions, clicking, it just won't work until it's done. Promises help you avoid this. So, Chris Drupal said this to me. This is promises handle the future outcome of your long-running function. So, I don't promise to handle the outcome of your long-running function, but promises do. So, promises really only have 3 states. This is important to know. Okay, so the initial state when you create a new promise, right? It's pending. It hasn't like done anything yet. It's sort of suspended. Fulfilled, right? This is the state of a promise when the finished operation has happened. It's like, it doesn't mean that this succeeded, right? If you're making an Ajax call for something and you get a 404 response, that's like technically a success, but we didn't throw an exception. There was no like tragic failure of your code. But what you wanted to do may not have actually worked. So, rejected. This is the failed state failed operation. Your code, some exception was thrown, you threw in a new error, you rejected the promise. This handler will catch that. So basically, here's a promise. When you create a new promise constructor, resolve and reject, and these are functions that are used to tell you, like, okay, this thing that we did, this like long-running action, this is done, or it's been rejected, something failed to this. Something that is not always immediately clear, when you create a new promise, this variable represents the initial pending state of the promise. And then, which is like, okay, after this is succeeded, then call this function. And whatever you're returning with resolve is passed to your sort of then handler. This just prints hello world after 250 milliseconds. Great. So this is just, there's a great website. What's this called? Promises. I'll show you maybe after this. It's a great way to visualize your promise code. And this one only creates a new promise and then is immediately resolved. There's no other like branching states for this. One other thing to keep in mind, promises can only be fulfilled or rejected once. Once that state has like transitioned, there's nothing else you can do. So here, then, and then we call this sort of like success function. There's a little bit of like a not used way, but then actually takes two possible parameters. The first one is if the promise is fulfilled, and the second is if the promise is rejected, right? And I basically never see anybody use this second one. But these are equivalent, right? We've created a new promise, and like primitives will resolve promises immediately. This promise is immediately resolved with 42, and then catch is just like catch all the errors for this promise. We'll talk about that in just a second. But promise.then, and there's two functions here. This one will catch if there's an error, and this one will catch if there's a success. Please use catch. Don't pass the second parameter to then. It's not ever very clear what's happening. And if you're chaining multiple then statements together, you can use one catch, which will capture any thrown exceptions in all of your promise tree. So, any questions? No. Yeah, let me just like finish typing this in the. Sorry, we're just talking about just like classes very briefly. So, you're familiar with like PHP classes, probably, and anybody use JavaScript classes? Nobody. Not maybe. So, classes are in reality just syntactic sugar over JavaScript's existing like prototype-based inheritance. They don't add anything. Like there's no new object-oriented interface with classes. It's not this like magic thing we're getting. So classes really just give you a nice sort of interface to capture your data. If you're used to like writing a function and then adding things to the prototype, you can create a new instance of Drupal and attach some properties and methods. This is like the only slide I have for this because I didn't really, we basically never used these already in Drupal, and I don't want to like, give people hope. Great. So, thanks, Peace Wave, and any questions? No, I know it's hot. I'm hot. It's very hot. So, nothing. Okay. Oh.
Do you think ES6 will remove the external JS libraries in code?
External JS libraries?
Oh, yeah, like underscore, for
I mean, underscore's got its place, but are you saying you want to like remove underscore?
Well, no, that's
I mean, maybe someday, but this not like definitely not in a 8x release cycle. We couldn't. There's too many pieces and things that use those. We can only reduce like new code, new pieces that are added, reduce sort of dependencies on those kind of libraries. So that's like my opinion. I'm just staring at it. So great. Yes.
Yeah, how far is the browser support for all the stuff that you already showed us? Which browser is like the bad guy?
I mean, Internet Explorer is always a bad guy. Yes. Oh, yeah, Safari. Sally hates Safari. So if you're familiar with Drupal core, there's a transpile process that we use right now for all of core's JavaScript. The only reason we have that is due to support for Internet Explorer 11 right now. If we didn't need to support old IE, then we wouldn't really need to transpile. So a lot of this stuff is very well supported in browsers today. So.
Can you explain what the result of the transpile process is?
Yes. Okay, so good question about what the result of the transpile process is. So you can write like very fancy new JavaScript in core today, and we will make it ES5 compatible, which means it will work back in the oldest browser that we support, which is Internet Explorer 11 in this case. So you write new fancy code, and you get out less fancy old JavaScript. So great. Yes, Daniel?
Do you know what ECMAScript actually stands for?
I don't know what ECMAScript. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, just Google RLA. Okay. Yeah. Where's this browser window? Where's my mouse? What?
So it stands for European Computers Manufacturers Association.
Of course it does. That makes like perfect sense. I just like don't understand how to use this computer thing. So, okay, great. Any other questions?
How about that visualizer?
Yeah, good. Thanks for reminding me for like the 10th time. What's that thing called?
Promise CDs.
Promise. E. This guy? Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah. All right. Wow. This is like looks really terrible. Maybe like zoom out or something. So this is like
off the hash and they'll do it.
this guy. Well, just like do a basic. Yeah. So this is this great promise visualizer tool. So if you're like running this like wild thing and you want to see what's actually happening or what could happen, this tool is really useful. Fetch, it's just like browser thing for making AJAX requests to things. So this like fetches, and then fetch is like asynchronous promise enabled by default, so you can, it's thenable, so you can just write then res, and then this gets the status. This uses that second function passed to then, which I don't like at all. This also is catch down here. See, so this is like the initial fetch, the resolver. Then and catch, these two boxes represent like this first function and then this second function in then. Then again, which logs the status of the promise. This is like global catch again, then, and then a catch, just in case, like, whatever this status resolves to errors out, it'll catch. So it's pretty useful if you have something complicated and you want to know why it might not be working. So great. Anything else? Do you want me to like explain anything else about this?
No.
Okay.
I mean, it is kind of useful to see the 4, 5, and 7 all run in parallel, basically.
Yes.
So any column of bubbles
Yes.
There's a really good article that everyone should read.
Oh, yeah?
And it's on, if you Google PouchDB, we have a problem with promises.
PouchDB.
We have a problem.
We have a
That should be
with.
promises.
Okay. Yeah, this is a great article. Sally just mentioned it. Go to it. I'm not a robot. Cool. Submit.
Yeah, everyone should read that.
Okay, I'll put this in my link to this in my slides, which I'll just like tweet out after this. Yeah, definitely read this. It's probably great. I haven't read it, but I should read it. I probably don't know what. Great. Okay. Thanks, everybody.